The champagne in the flute had gone flat, mirroring the stale air in our Upper East Side penthouse. Yet Elena still wore that practiced, dazzling smile for the guests. Under the table, her hand didn't rest on my knee as it used to. It clutched her phone, thumbing a message that made her eyes light up with a secret thrill she thought I was too blind to see. It wasn't just an affair. It was the quiet, deliberate erasing of my existence from her future, happening right in front of me. If you find yourself drawn to the sharp edges of betrayal and the cold, calculated path of redemption, stay with me, because the truth is about to cut deep. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, reflecting the neon lights of a city that never slept but always whispered. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of their Tribeca apartment, his forehead resting against the cold glass. Behind him, the sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor announced Elena's arrival. It was 1:45 a.m. The gala at the Met had ended 4 hours ago. "You're still up," Elena said. Her voice was devoid of warmth, stripped of the melodic tone she used for her gallery clients. It was the voice she reserved for him lately, flat, tired, and laced with a subtle irritation. Julian didn't turn around. He watched a solitary yellow cab streak down the wet street below. I waited. For what? To interrogate me? The sound of her clutch hitting the marble island in the kitchen was sharp, like a gunshot in a canyon. "I told you, Julian. Carter and I had to discuss the acquisition for the spring collection. Art doesn't sell itself." "Art doesn't," Julian said, finally turning. He looked at his wife. Elena was breathtaking in her emerald silk gown, the fabric clinging to a body he had worshipped for 7 years. But tonight, the sight of her brought a nausea that curled tight in his gut. There was a faint smudge of lipstick at the corner of her mouth, a shade slightly darker than what she had left with. And on her neck, hidden beneath the carefully arranged waves of her chestnut hair, was a shadow. A mark. Julian walked to the kitchen island. He picked up the envelope sitting there, the foreclosure notice he had hidden for weeks, trying to fix things, trying to secure that contract that never came. He placed it next to her diamond-encrusted clutch. "I know, Elena." Elena paused, her hand halfway to the wine fridge. She froze, her back stiffening. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, suffocating. She didn't ask what he knew. She was too smart for that. Slowly she turned. Her eyes, usually so expressive, were now cold shards of hazel glass. She didn't look guilty. She looked relieved. "You checked my phone?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "I didn't have to," Julian replied, his voice breaking despite his best effort to remain steady. "I saw the way he touched the small of your back when he dropped you off downstairs. I saw you kiss him, Elena, right in front of our building." He waited for the denial. He waited for the tears, the excuses, the plea for forgiveness. He was prepared to forgive. God help him. He was pathetic enough that he might have forgiven her if she had just begged. Instead, Elena laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "So?" She leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. The mask fell away completely. "Are you going to lecture me on morality, Julian? You? The man who can't even keep a roof over our heads?" Julian felt the air leave his lungs. This isn't about money. It's about us. About 10 years. 10 years of mediocrity." She spat the words out. "Look at you. You're an architect who builds nothing but pipe dreams. Carter builds empires. He moves the skyline, Julian. You just stare at it." "I loved you," Julian whispered. "I gave you everything I had. And that's the problem. Elena took a step forward, her face twisted in a sneer of genuine contempt. Everything you have is negligible. You are suffocating me with your smallness. I need a partner, not a dependent. She picked up the foreclosure notice, glanced at it, and tossed it back onto the counter as if it were trash. Go ahead. Leave, she challenged, gesturing to the door. Where will you go? Who are you without me, Julian? Without the connections I introduced you to? Without this apartment I pay for? She leaned in close, her perfume, a scent of jasmine and betrayal, filling his senses. You are nothing, she said, enunciating every syllable. You are absolutely nothing. The words didn't hurt. They killed. They killed the part of him that was trying to hold on. The Julian who pleaded, the Julian who hoped, died in that instant. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized he was looking at a stranger, a beautiful, hollow stranger. Okay, Julian said softly. He walked past her, not toward the bedroom to pack, but straight to the front door. He grabbed his coat. He didn't take his phone. He didn't take his keys. He didn't take the wedding band off his finger. He simply slid it off and placed it on the entry table. It made a small, metallic clink. Julian? Elena called out, a flicker of confusion finally breaking through her arrogance. She hadn't expected him to just walk. Don't be dramatic, Julian! He opened the door. The hallway air was cool. You're right, he said, not looking back. Julian Vance is nothing. He stepped out and closed the door. The lock clicked shut, sealing the tomb of his former life. Outside, the elevator awaited, ready to take him down into the darkness, where he would either dissolve or harden into something unbreakable. The Greyhound bus terminal in Port Authority was a purgatory of exhaust fumes and lost souls, a fitting place for a funeral. Julian Vance didn't bury a body that night. He buried a name. He dropped his smartphone into a trash can overflowing with discarded coffee cups. The screen lit up one last time. A notification from a mutual friend asking if he was okay, before sliding into the filth. He didn't look back. He bought a ticket west, as far as the cash in his pocket would take him. Seattle. The Pacific Northwest greeted him with a sky the color of a bruised plum. He rented a studio apartment in a neighborhood where sirens were the nightly lullaby. The room smelled of mildew and stale cigarette smoke, a sharp contrast to the lavender-scented sheets of the Tribeca penthouse. But for the first time in years, the air he breathed felt entirely his own. Julian didn't sleep. Sleep was where the memories lived. Elena's laugh, the curve of her neck, the cruelty in her eyes. Instead, he worked. He bought a second-hand laptop and salvaged servers from a liquidation sale. The pipe dream Elena had mocked was a decentralized financial architecture, a system designed to be impenetrable, much like the wall he was building around his heart. He became a ghost. He ate instant noodles, drank black coffee, and coded until his fingers cramped and his vision blurred. He grew a beard, hiding the soft jawline of the man who used to arrange flowers for his wife. Julian Vance was dead. In the glow of the monitors, J.V. Black was being born, line by line, block by block. 3,000 miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking Central Park, Elena was learning the texture of her new life. "Wear the red dress," Carter said, not looking up from his tablet. He was sitting at the head of the mahogany dining table, the morning sun glinting off his silver cufflinks. Elena paused, her hand hovering over a silk beige blouse. "I thought the beige was more appropriate for the gallery opening. It's understated." "You're not going there to be understated, Elle," Carter said, his voice smooth but firm, like velvet wrapped around a crowbar. "You're going there as my partner. I need you to pop. Wear the red." It was a small thing, trivial really, but a cold prickle of unease ran down Elena's spine. With Julian, she had made the decisions. Julian had asked her opinion on everything, from his tie to his blueprints. Carter didn't ask. He announced. "Fine," Elena said, forcing a smile. She put the beige blouse away. "The red one." Carter finally looked up, offering a dazzling, predatory smile. "That's my girl. By the way, I had my assistant look over your gallery's quarterly projections. We're going to need to make some cuts. That indie artist you like? The one with the abstract sculptures? He's out. Not commercially viable." "But he's the soul of the upcoming exhibition," Elena protested, her grip tightening on the closet door handle. "Soul doesn't pay the rent, Elena. I do." Carter stood up, walked over and kissed her forehead. It felt less like affection and more like a seal of ownership. "Trust me. I know business. You just look beautiful." He left the room, leaving Elena standing in the vast, luxurious walk-in closet. It was filled with designer clothes, yet suddenly the space felt incredibly small. She thought of Julian. She remembered how he used to listen to her talk about art for hours, his eyes filled with genuine admiration for her passion, not just her appearance. She shook the thought away. Julian was the past. Julian was nothing. She was with a winner now. Back in Seattle, the rain lashed against the single-pane window of the studio. Julian hit enter. The code compiled without errors. The algorithm was live. The first deposit, a small, tentative investment from an anonymous angel investor in Singapore, pinged into the account. It was a start. Julian leaned back in his creaking chair, staring at the screen. His reflection in the monitor was gaunt, dark-eyed, and hard. He touched the empty space on his ring finger. The skin there was no longer pale. It was callous. "You wanted a billionaire," he whispered to the empty room, his voice raspy from disuse. "I'll give you one, but you won't be able to touch him." He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 months, he didn't dream of her. He dreamed of numbers, vast and cold, stacking up to the sky, blotting out the sun. 5 years in New York is an eternity. It is enough time for skylines to shift, for fortunes to evaporate, and for love to curdle into a dull, aching habit. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel smelled of expensive lilies and desperation. To the casual observer, the charity gala was a peak social event, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns swirling under crystal chandeliers. But Elena Vance knew better. She knew that half the people in this room were leveraging assets they didn't own to impress people they didn't like. She adjusted the strap of her silver gown, feeling the familiar, tightening grip of Carter's hand on her lower back. It wasn't a caress. It was an anchor. "Smile," Carter whispered, leaning in close. His breath smelled of scotch and mints. "The board of directors from Black Capital is here. If we secure this meeting, the waterfront project is saved." "I am smiling, Carter," Elena replied, keeping her gaze fixed on the crowd. Her jaw ached from the effort. Carter was not the man he was 5 years ago. The arrogance was still there, but it was brittle now, prone to cracking under pressure. His real estate firm, Sterling Heights, was hemorrhaging money. The lawsuits, the stalled construction sites, the whispers in the financial district. It was a dam waiting to burst. And Elena, once the prized trophy, had become the crutch he leaned on to keep up appearances. "They say J.V. Black never shows his face," a woman to their left murmured to her husband. He sends his wolves, but never the alpha. He's buying up half of Manhattan, the husband replied, awe mixed with fear. Tech, biomed, and now distressed real estate. If he wants you, he owns you. Elena tuned them out. She took a sip of champagne, wishing it was strong, enough to numb the regret that had become her constant companion. She thought of Julian often lately. Not the Julian she left, but the phantom of him. She wondered if he was still in some cramped apartment, drawing sketches no one would build. She hoped he was happy. She hoped he was far away from this Shark Tank. Suddenly, the hum of conversation in the ballroom dipped. Then it silenced completely. It started at the double doors at the far end of the room and rippled outward like a wave. Heads turned. Glasses were lowered. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. A small group of men in dark suits entered first, clearing a path with efficient, silent authority. And then he walked in. He was tall, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders with architectural precision. He didn't walk with the hurried, frantic energy of the New York elite. He moved with a slow, predatory grace, as if he owned the very ground beneath his feet. His hair was cut short, sharp and modern, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face that had hardened into something statuesque. Carter's grip on Elena's waist tightened painfully. "My God," he whispered. "That's him. That's J.V. Black." Elena squinted against the glare of the chandeliers. There was something familiar about the man's gait, the way he held his head, the slight, deliberate pause before he took a step. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of denial. It can't be. The man stopped in the center of the room. A server offered him a glass of water. He took it, his hand steady, large, and devoid of any wedding band. He turned slowly, scanning the room. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and terrifyingly cold. Then, his gaze landed on them. He didn't look at Carter. He looked straight at Elena. Time seemed to warp. The noise of the room faded into a dull roar. Elena felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her lightheaded. It was the same face she had woken up to for 7 years, but stripped of all the softness. The kindness was gone. The hesitation was gone. In its place was a steel-reinforced resolve that made him look like a stranger and an intimate enemy all at once. "Julian?" she breathed, the name barely escaping her lips. Carter frowned, leaning down. "What did you say?" The man across the room didn't smile. He simply held Elena's gaze for 3 agonizing seconds, acknowledging her presence, acknowledging her shock, and then looked away, as if she were a piece of furniture. He turned to the heavy-set man beside him and said something that made the associate nod vigorously. They began to walk toward Carter and Elena. "He's coming over," Carter hissed, panic and excitement warring in his voice. He smoothed his lapel, oblivious to his wife's trembling hands. "Pull yourself together, Elena. This is it. This is the money." Elena couldn't move. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. The man she had called nothing was walking toward her, and the floor felt like it was tilting under her feet. Julian Vance hadn't just returned. He had ascended. And looking at him now, Elena realized with a sickening clarity that he hadn't come to save them. He had come to collect. The distance between them closed, shrinking the world down to the 3 of them amidst the cacophony of the gala. Carter stepped forward, his hand extended, eager and sweating slightly under the collar. "Mr. Black," Carter said, his voice pitching slightly higher than usual. "It is an honor. I'm Carter Sterling, CEO of Sterling Heights, We've been trying to reach your office for weeks." Julian stopped. He looked at Carter's hand for a fraction of a second too long before taking it. The shake was brief, firm, and dismissive. "I know who you are, Mr. Sterling," Julian said. His voice was a deep baritone, smoother than the man Elena remembered, polished by years of boardroom warfare. "I've been reading your financial reports. They make for interesting fiction." Carter's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. Well, the market has been volatile, but with the right partner." He hurriedly turned to Elena, pulling her forward like a shield. "May I introduce my wife and business partner, Elena Sterling. She runs the Sterling Gallery." Julian shifted his gaze to Elena. Up close, the changes in him were devastating. The faint scar on his chin from a bicycle accident in college was still there, hidden beneath the beard, a secret geography only she knew. But his eyes, they were walls. "Mrs. Sterling," Julian said. He didn't extend his hand. He simply nodded, a gesture of impeccable, icy politeness. "Mr. Black," Elena managed to say. Her throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. "It's a surprise to see you here." "I imagine it is," Julian replied, his eyes locking onto hers. "I usually avoid places built on pretense, but sometimes you have to inspect a potential investment in person to see if the foundation is rotting." The double meaning struck Elena like a physical blow. She swayed slightly, clutching her clutch so hard her knuckles turned white. Carter, oblivious to the subtext, laughed nervously. "Well, you'll find no rot here, sir. Sterling Heights is ready for a comeback." "Is it?" Julian asked, turning back to Carter. "I'm prepared to buy your distressed debt, Carter. All of it. $80 million. Carter's eyes widened. He looked like a man who had just been handed water in a desert. You are? That's incredible. We can discuss the equity split." "There is no discussion," Julian cut him off softly. "I buy the debt. I take 51% of the voting rights. I appoint the new CFO, and I own the gallery's lease as collateral." "The gallery?" Carter hesitated, glancing at Elena. "That's Elena's project. It's separate." "It's all connected, isn't it?" Julian said, checking his watch. A Patek Philippe that cost more than their first apartment. "Those are my terms. You have 24 hours. I need a drink," Carter stammered, overwhelmed by the speed of the negotiation. "I need to call my lawyer. Excuse me for one moment. Just one moment." Carter practically ran toward the bar, leaving Elena alone with the wolf. The circle of privacy around them felt suffocating. Elena looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes, threatening to ruin her mascara. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Julian looked down at her. He took a sip of his water, his expression unreadable. "I'm doing business, Mrs. Sterling. Something you told me I wasn't capable of." "Don't do this," she pleaded, stepping closer, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm before pulling back. "You're going to destroy him. You're going to destroy me." "You destroyed yourself, Elena," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The indifference in his tone was far more painful than anger. "I'm just the bank. You wanted a billionaire, didn't you? You wanted someone who moves the skyline." He leaned in slightly, and for a heartbeat she thought he might kiss her or scream at her. Instead, he whispered near her ear, intimate and terrifying. "I moved the skyline, Elena. Now I'm standing in your shadow, and I don't feel a thing. Please," she choked out. "I'm sorry. For everything." Julian straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. The mask was back in place. "Save your apologies," he said coldly. "They don't accrue interest. Tell your husband to sign the papers by tomorrow noon, or don't. It makes no difference to me." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of admirers waiting for him, leaving Elena standing alone in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by gold, yet feeling utterly, completely destitute. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Black Capitol building was a fortress of glass and brushed steel. It was designed to intimidate, offering a panoramic view of the city that made everything below look like toys. Elena sat on the left side of the long mahogany table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Across from her, Carter was flipping through a thick binder of financial reports, his forehead glistening with a sheen of sweat, despite the aggressive air conditioning. At the head of the table sat Julian. He wasn't looking at the view. He was reading a single sheet of paper, his expression impassive. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic tapping of Julian's pen against the table. "Let's begin," Julian said, not looking up. "I've reviewed the quarterly projections for Sterling Heights. To call them optimistic would be a kindness. I call them fraudulent." Carter jerked upright. "Mr. Black, the market has been—" "The market is fine, Carter," Julian interrupted, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Your management is the problem. You're over-leveraged on 3 residential projects in Brooklyn that have been stalled for 6 months. You're bleeding cash on operational costs, specifically overhead." Julian slid the paper down the table. It stopped perfectly in front of Carter. "Explain this line item," Julian commanded. Carter looked down. That's the marketing budget for the Sterling Gallery." Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "The gallery brings in high-end clientele," she interjected, her voice sounding thin in the large room. "It establishes the brand's prestige. We have an exhibition next month that—" Julian turned his head slowly to look at her. It was the first time he had acknowledged her presence since they entered the room. "Prestige is a luxury for companies that are profitable, Mrs. Sterling," Julian said. "Sterling Heights is insolvent. I am not in the business of funding hobbies." "Hobbies." The word hung in the air, sharp and dismissing. Elena flushed. She remembered nights in their old, cramped apartment where she would cry over a failed show, and Julian would hold her, telling her that her vision mattered, that art was essential. Now he was reducing her life's work to a line on a spreadsheet. She turned to Carter, expecting him to defend her. Carter was the one who had insisted she open the gallery. He was the one who said they were a power couple. "Carter," she said, urging him with her eyes, "tell him about the projected sales from the Modernism collection." Carter didn't look at her. He was looking at Julian, reading the room, calculating his own survival. He saw the cold, uncompromising power in Julian's eyes and made a choice. "JV is right, Elena," Carter said, his voice taking on a sycophantic tone that made Elena's skin crawl. "Excuse me?" she whispered. Carter turned to Julian, nodding eagerly. "The gallery has been a drain on resources. I've told Elena repeatedly that we need to scale back. It was mostly her initiative, a passion project. If we need to cut fat to save the company, I agree. The gallery should be the first to go." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stared at her husband. She saw the weak chin, the shifting eyes, the desperate need to please the man who now owned him. In that moment, the illusion of Carter Sterling, the titan, the protector, the empire builder, dissolved completely. He was just a coward in a $3,000 suit. Julian watched the exchange with a clinical detachment. He didn't look triumphant. He looked bored. "Good," Julian said, closing his folder. "I'm glad we're on the same page, Carter. Cut the gallery's funding by 80% effective immediately. Cancel the upcoming exhibition." "But the contracts," Elena started, her voice shaking with a mix of fury and humiliation. "Are now my problem," Julian finished. He stood up, signaling the meeting was over. "Carter, stay. We need to discuss your compensation package. It will be significantly adjusted to reflect your performance." "Of course, JV. Whatever you need," Carter said, already forgetting his wife's humiliation in his eagerness to secure his own salary. Julian looked at Elena one last time. "You're dismissed, Mrs. Sterling." Elena stood up, her legs feeling like lead. She grabbed her purse and walked to the glass doors. She didn't look back at Carter. She couldn't bear to. But as she exited, she caught a glimpse of Julian's reflection in the glass wall. He wasn't looking at Carter. He was watching her leave, his expression grim, like a judge who had just delivered a sentence he took no pleasure in. She walked into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of her husband groveling to her ex-husband, Elena realized the true weight of her mistake. She hadn't just traded love for money. She had traded a man for a parasite. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse, a silent glide that felt less like arriving and more like ascending to a different atmospheric layer. Elena stepped out, the heels of her shoes sinking into a rug that cost more than her father's car. The apartment at 432 Park Avenue was a cavern of shadows and glass. The city grid of Manhattan sprawled below like a circuit board, glowing and indifferent. It was beautiful, cold, and imposing, just like the man standing by the fireplace. Julian didn't turn around. He was swirling a glass of amber liquid, staring into the gas flames. "The concierge shouldn't have let you up," he said. His voice didn't echo. The room was too vast, absorbing the sound instantly. "I told him I was your wife," Elena lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Old habits." "Bad habits," Julian corrected. He finally turned. He had shed the suit jacket, unbuttoned his collar, and rolled up his sleeves. His forearms were corded with muscle, a physical testament to the years she had missed. He looked tired, but it was the fatigue of a general after a battle, not the exhaustion of a defeated man. Elena walked further into the room, hugging her coat around herself. The space was minimalist to the point of austerity. No photos, no clutter, just expensive art and empty space. "Carter fired half my staff today," she said softly. "On your orders." "On my recommendation." Julian took a sip of his bourbon. "Carter pulled the trigger. He's very good at sacrificing others to save himself. You should know that by now." "I made a mistake, Julian." The sentence hung in the air. Elena took a step closer, her eyes pleading. She needed him to see her. Not Mrs. Sterling, not the enemy, but Elena, the woman he had once promised to build a world for. "I was young," she continued, her voice trembling with a practiced vulnerability. "I was blinded by him. He promised me the world, but he's hollow. He's not like you. You've become everything I always knew you could be." Julian watched her approach with a detached curiosity. "Is that what this is? You're here to congratulate me on finally meeting your standards?" "No." Elena stopped a few feet away from him. She could smell the soap he used, sandalwood and sea salt. It was familiar, painfully so. "I'm here because I'm drowning, and I know you still care. You wouldn't have bought the debt if you didn't. You wouldn't be tormenting Carter if you didn't feel something for me." She reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric of his shirt. "We were good once, Julian. Before the money troubles. Before Carter. We can find that again." Julian didn't flinch, but he didn't lean into her touch either. He simply looked down at her hand on his chest, as if it were a foreign object. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times and held it up to her face. It wasn't a photo of them. It was a screenshot of a text message chain from 5 years ago. From the night she told him he was nothing. "Elena, 5 years ago. He's finally leaving. God, he's pathetic. I should have done this months ago. Order the champagne, Carter. I'm free." Elena froze. The blood drained from her face. She remembered sending that text. She remembered the thrill of cruelty she had felt in that moment. "I recovered the data from the cloud," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I have the emails too. The ones where you mocked my designs to Carter. The ones where you called our marriage a starter kit for your real life." He put the phone away and stepped back, breaking her contact with him. "Don't rewrite history, Elena. You weren't a victim. You weren't confused. You were calculating. You bet on Carter because you thought he was the winning ticket. Now that the ticket is worthless, you want a refund." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. The truth stripped her naked. There was no romance to hide behind, no narrative of a tragic mistake. "I have changed," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I have suffered, Julian." "We all suffer," Julian said, walking past her toward the window. "The difference is, I used my suffering to build this. You used yours to buy shoes." He gestured to the door. "Go home to your husband, Elena. He's waiting for you. And don't come back here. The next time you see me, it will be in court." Elena stood there for a moment, looking at his back. He was a silhouette against the city lights, a monolith of gold and shadow. She realized then that the Julian she knew was truly dead. She had killed him 5 years ago, and this stranger was out of her league. She turned and walked to the elevator, the sound of her heels sharp and lonely in the vast, empty penthouse. The Sterling Gallery was quiet. The cleaning crews had gone home, leaving only the three of them under the unforgiving glare of the track lighting. The abstract paintings on the walls, splashes of violent red and chaotic black, seemed to mock the stillness of the room. Julian stood by the main desk, a thick manila folder resting under his hand. Carter sat opposite him, looking like a man who had aged a decade in 24 hours. Elena stood by the window, her arms crossed, watching the streetlights bleed into the wet pavement outside. "Forensic accounting is a fascinating field," Julian began, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. He tapped the folder. "It tells stories that people try to hide, like this one. 2 sets of books for the construction projects, offshore accounts in the Caymans under shell companies, tax evasion, wire fraud." Carter's face was the color of old parchment. He reached for a glass of water, his hand shaking so badly a few drops spilled onto the polished desk. "It was creative accounting," Carter rasped. "Everyone does it." "The FBI disagrees," Julian said. "I have enough here to put you away for 15 years, Carter. Maybe 20, given the scale." Elena turned around, horror dawning on her face. "Carter, is this true?" Carter ignored her. He was staring at Julian, his eyes wide with terror. "What do you want, Black? You already own the debt. You own the board." "I want you gone," Julian said simply. He slid a contract across the desk. This is a buyout agreement. I purchase your remaining equity in Sterling Heights for $2 million. In exchange, you sign a non-compete clause that bans you from doing business in the United States for 10 years. $2 million? Carter sputtered. The company was valued at $200 million last year. The company is a corpse, Carter. I'm just paying for the funeral, Julian replied coldly. Sign it, take the first flight to Zurich, and I lose this file. Don't sign it, and I call the federal prosecutor. I have him on speed dial. Carter looked at the contract. Then he looked at the folder. He didn't look at his wife, not even once. Where is the pen? Carter asked. Carter! Elena screamed, rushing forward. You can't just leave. What about me? What about us? Carter uncapped the pen Julian offered. He signed his name with a frantic, jagged scrawl. There is no us, Elena. Not anymore. I'm not going to jail for you. I'm not going to jail for anyone. He stood up, clutching the check Julian had prepared. He looked at Elena with a sneer of pure self-preservation. You're a survivor, Elle. Figure it out. And then he ran. He actually ran out of the gallery, the glass door swinging wildly behind him, leaving Elena standing in the center of the room, abandoned. She looked at Julian. He was calmly putting the signed contract into his briefcase. He left me, she whispered, the reality crashing down on her. He sold you out, Julian corrected. There's a difference. So what now? Elena asked, her voice hardening, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. You own the gallery. Are you going to fire me? Go ahead, do it. Julian looked around the room, evaluating the space. Fire you? No. I need someone to manage the transition. Transition? Hope flickered in Elena's eyes. You mean, keep the gallery running? No, Julian said. I bought this building because the location is perfect for a server farm. The cooling costs will be lower in the basement. This gallery ceases to exist on Monday. Elena gasped. You can't. This is my life. These artists rely on me. Then you better start packing, Julian said, his voice flat. I'm offering you a job, Elena. Temporary contractor. You coordinate the return of the artwork to the artists. You manage the liquidation of the furniture. You sweep the floors when the movers are done. You want me to be a janitor in my own gallery? She hissed, tears of rage welling up. I want you to see what it feels like to dismantle a life, Julian said, walking toward the door. The pay is minimum wage. Take it or leave it. But considering your name is attached to Carter's debts, I suggest you take the paycheck. He stopped at the door, his hand on the light switch. Turn off the lights when you leave, Elena. Electricity costs money. Julian flipped the switch. The front of the gallery plunged into darkness, leaving Elena standing alone in the single spotlight of the back office, surrounded by art that no longer had a home, trapped in a cage of her own making. The gallery was finally empty. The vibrant canvases, the sculptures, the pretension, all of it had been packed into crates and shipped away. All that remained were the pale rectangles on the walls where the art had hung, ghost images of a dream that had died. Elena sat on a folding chair in the middle of the room. She wore jeans and a gray t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. There was dust on her cheek. She looked younger, smaller, and infinitely more human than she had in years. When the front door opened, she didn't jump. She knew who it was. Julian walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a dark wool coat and a scarf, looking like any other New Yorker bracing for the autumn chill. He stopped a few feet away, surveying the empty space. The movers said they were finished, he said. His voice was neutral, lacking the sharp edge of disdain that had carried him through the last week. They are, Elena replied. Her voice was hoarse. I swept the floors myself, just like you asked. She stood up and walked over to him, extending a ring of keys. The metal jingled in the silence. Here, it's all yours. Or your server's, I guess. Julian took the keys. He looked at them for a moment, then slipped them into his coat pocket. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope. This is for you, he said, handing it to her. Elena took it, her hands trembling slightly. What is it? A termination notice? An eviction? Open it. She tore the seal. Inside was a legal document. She scanned the lines, her eyes widening as she reached the bottom. It was a deed of release. Julian had absolved her of personal liability for the debts Carter had accrued in her name. She was broke, yes, but she wasn't bankrupt. She wasn't shackled to a mountain of debt she could never repay. She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. Not the tears of manipulation this time, but of genuine shock. Why? She asked. After everything I said to you? After everything I did? Why would you save me? Julian looked at her, and for the first time, the ice in his eyes thawed. What replaced it wasn't love, but a weary, distant pity. Because hating you is exhausting, Elena, he said softly. And because once, a long time ago, you were the only person who believed in me. I'm paying a debt to that girl, not to the woman standing here. Elena clutched the paper to her chest. A sob broke from her throat. Julian, I am so sorry. I was lost. I thought I needed to be someone else to matter. Can't we? Is there any chance we could try again? Not now, but maybe someday? Julian shook his head slowly. The gesture was final. No, he said. The Julian you knew is gone. You killed him, remember? And I don't know who you are anymore. We're just two strangers who share a set of bad memories. He stepped back, putting a definitive distance between them. You're free, Elena. You have a clean slate. Don't waste it this time. He turned and walked toward the door. The sound of his boots on the hardwood floor was rhythmic, steady. Julian, she called out one last time, her voice cracking. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the glass door, the city light framing his silhouette. He didn't look back. Goodbye, Elena. He pushed the door open and stepped out into the crisp November air. The noise of New York rushed in to meet him, sirens, chatter, the rumble of engines. It was chaotic and loud, but to Julian, it sounded like music. He adjusted his scarf, took a deep breath of the cold air, and looked up at the skyline. It was vast, indifferent, and full of possibility. He hailed a cab, the yellow car pulling up to the curb. As he slid into the back seat and the car merged into the river of traffic, he didn't check his phone. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. Julian Vance was no longer nothing. He was, finally, entirely himself,